Hey, what's up? This is Kev from the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast, and you're listening to the BS Podcast Network. Enjoy the show.
In a world of ordinary fantasy football podcasts, ordinary guys rise up to bring you extraordinary analysis and entertainment. This is the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts Kevin Cotillo, Sal Lito, and Stephen Marcus.
Everybody's so glad you're here. Schoolio with the flow back in your ear. This ain't a fantastic words, but I'm still on the mission. Let's see if I can get your attention. Now I want to drop some information, just a little additive to your education. I live my life by the code of the funk, 600 watt F18s in the trunk. When I'm on the street, you gotta feel my beat, so throw your hands up if you're down with the seat. Double O-L-I-O with the flow. I'm looking for the party, so better know. 1, 2, 3, it's like ABC. If hip-hop didn't pay, I rap for free. Slide, slide, but that's the path. I got something brand new for today. 1, 2, 3, 4, get your woman on the floor. Gonna get up, get down. Gonna get up, get down. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today is Thursday, July 20th, and this is the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome to the show. I have with me Sal Lito. What's going on, Sal?
What is up, guys? I made it home in time to actually record on the computer. Or else you guys would have heard me driving along the Long Island Expressway, bumping all over the place on this episode tonight. But I made it. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you made it. However, you may notice I'm going to try to talk pretty quickly because apparently we now have a time clock because your computer is going to force itself to shut down. So
my computer will detonate in 14 minutes.
That's right. So we're going to try and burn through this Falafel House pretty quickly and get you some solid knowledge. We do have Steve Marcus with us. What's going on, Steve?
Oh, I'm here. Not much is going on. And I actually think it would have been more entertaining to hear Sal going through the road rage that is lived on the Long Island Expressway.
It's Long Island.
Long Island. I think the good news is
Long Island. Got it.
Next week, on Thursday night show next week, my son has a doubleheader at 7 and 9 o'clock. So I will be recording on location at the baseball field for next week's show. So
we have a guest next week, right? We have two guests next week. Does everyone know we have two shows next week? No one knows that. They do now.
I do know that. Well, everyone knows that now. That's nice of you to drop that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I will say that next week we are. I don't plan to be there on Thursday though.
Really?
So that's interesting. I just realized that. But
it's a star-studded week in the Falafel House podcast. So
I know. Maybe I can figure it out from the road. I will be in lovely Detroit, Michigan. So.
You've podcasted from location before. So.
I have.
Motown.
Went very well. Yes, I will be in Motown. So we'll see. Maybe I can get that done. We will try to figure that out.
Kevin, if I have one recommendation, it's put the extra lock on your door in the hotel room.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's going to his in-laws.
No, I'm not actually. The in-laws live here now, Steve. You know that.
I'm going to edit
You're aware
that
of this. There is family out there. Yeah, you can just edit that out. There is family out there, but we are staying in hotels. We are going out for a wedding, so it's a whole big thing. Anyway, don't want to get into that. No one really cares. We have a great show for you tonight. We are going to bring in a guy that is so smart, he actually somehow made Steve stupider.
Yeah, not an easy task, I got to say. Not easy.
Very impressive.
And not only me, he dragged the rest of you guys down as well. He's on another level. That's for sure.
We should do an analytical breakdown of how dumb we got.
This is great. Is this a good way to start out a podcast? Is by telling everybody how stupid
how dumb we are? Just listen to everything we're about to say because we're really dumb. No, but the guy we brought on is really smart. JJ Zachariason, I always get that name wrong, is going to join us, and the guy's just so smart. He's an analytical fantasy football player, obviously, and he's going to tell you all the smart things that he does and why he knows which players to draft and which players not to draft. In the meantime, before we get to him, Sal, is there any news today? I feel like I haven't looked Anything good today that happened? Anything bad that happened today?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if this is good, but the juice is loose. So we got that out before all the newspapers got to post that tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's NFL. Is that NFL news? O.J. Simpson was officially granted parole. He'll be released in October. I guess that's news.
Theoretically, I don't know that he'll be on a team. Although if Le'Veon Bell gets suspended again, or maybe he can replace Zeke.
There is a pretty good chance he could start for the New York Jets.
He's only 70 behind that Dallas line. He might,
Let's put that line to the test. Can they protect a second-year quarterback and a 70-year-old running back? I say doubtful.
You're always so negative, Steve. I think he could do it. I'll bet he could still get a yard or two per carry.
I mean, that's not bad, but in comparison, I could probably get a yard or two.
I don't know about that. I think we've said that that's false.
You haven't seen my combine numbers.
I do not want to see your combine numbers.
Virtually non-existent.
They're embarrassing. Anything else going on, Steve? Anything that you need to talk about?
No, I got nothing.
I didn't think so. Let's just get to the guest.
Good evening. We interrupt your currently scheduled podcast to bring you a conversation with someone whom you may actually care about. The Flaffle House podcast proudly presents their interview of the week. Please do enjoy.
All right, tonight we want to bring in our guest. He is the editor of numberfire.com. He is the host of the Live the Stream fantasy football and late round podcast. Excuse me. He's the author of the Late Round Quarterback, Mr. JJ Zachariason. How's it going, JJ?
It's good, man. It's good. And thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. I got to say, I just today, I think it was, listened to the podcast you did with Rebar, and it's you guys just baffled me with numbers. Like I can't even follow it half the time. I got to go back and take notes.
Yeah, that's all Reeves, man. He's a wizard. He's an absolute wizard.
So why don't you give us? Obviously, I introduced you a little bit, but why don't you give us a little bit about what you do and what you've been doing, and where people can find you real quick, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, so I'm the editor-in-chief over at numberfire.com. We produce lots of content. We do player projections, DFS stuff. We have tools for DFS stuff, all you can think of. But I also host the Living the Stream podcast, as you mentioned, and the Late Round podcast, which is the one that you were talking about with that I did with Rich Rebar earlier in the week. It's more of a solo show, so it's mostly just my annoying voice talking to people throughout the week. And then I did author the Late Round Quarterback way back in the day, which kind of got me going within the industry and got me the gig that I have now.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely apparent from listening to your podcast and the stuff that comes out on Numberfire that you are an analytics guy, big into data. And so I was wondering if you saw the Twitter battle that was going on last week of the film guys versus the data guys, and where you come down in that battle, or if you draw a hard line on one side, or if you think that both of those things are pretty important when you're doing your fantasy scouting.
Yeah, I feel like if you were a part of fantasy football Twitter, it was tough to miss that discussion that went on Twitter. But it's usually how it goes. I feel like when there's a film versus data debate, some sort of like air horn is just thrown out there, and this fire alarm is just going off, and everyone has to run to their computer. But I mean, to me, with data, and I always say this, and obviously I'm more of an analytical person when it comes to the way that I analyze football. To me, data is not there to get you all of the answers that you were looking for. It's to help increase your probability on hitting. In fantasy football, on hitting on a player. I mean, even in the NFL draft, it's to increase your odds on hitting on a player as well. That's what analytics are there for in my mind. Film definitely has hit its spot. What I don't understand with the film versus data thing are the people who don't think that you can utilize the other side. So, obviously the data people, I don't understand the people who think that data can capture absolutely everything. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of data people might not be able to watch film correctly or well, which, it's a tough thing to do. And I'm certainly not someone who just grinds film. I'm looking at data a lot. I mean, I'm watching stuff, but I'm looking at data a lot. So I get that point. And then the opposite side, there are people who grind film, and they don't think that, or they're not capable necessarily of analyzing data. And I think that it comes out then as in, you can't utilize this other stuff, but they don't necessarily understand the other side very well. But the way that I look at the anti-analytics crowd. Now I'll back the data side just because it's where I come from. It's kind of like, you go into a test in high school or something. It's a math test, and your teacher's like, hey, you can use a calculator on this test. And the person's like, no, I don't need a calculator. It's like, why would you not? Why would you not use the calculator just to at least have some more context and some more information on how to get that answer? And that's the way that I kind of view data.
All right, so I'm curious. We didn't put this on the agenda, but now you've kind of sparked my curiosity here. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, leaning more towards the analytical side. Has there been any particular player that you can remember that you were really, really high on because of your, the analytical data that you were seeing, and then you watch film and were just like, wait a minute, this just does not match?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens a lot. I think that the position that it happens the most with is usually the running back position. And the reason for that is just because, the running back position in general, especially how it translates to fantasy football, it relies on so much. It relies on the offensive line's work. It relies on the efficiency of the quarterback play. So there's a lot of running backs that I'll look at and say, this guy doesn't look very good analytically. And then I'll watch and be like, wow, this guy's actually really good. I think a good example of that is Devontae Freeman. 2 years ago, and I think he actually tweeted about this earlier today about asking people who actually drafted him during his breakout 2015 campaign. And I was definitely not one of those people. And a lot of it was because...
I was.
nice. A lot of that was because he was really, really bad analytically his rookie season. I should have put more context to my decision and not having many shares of Devontae Freeman during his rookie season. But with that being said, you watch the guy and he's a monster. I mean, he's an unbelievable running back. So I think those are the kind of the instances where, you can't necessarily capture absolutely everything. I try to watch as much as I possibly can. I try to analyze as much as I possibly can. But then there's guys that'll slip through the cracks that you just don't realize, are way better. They look a lot better than they are with the numbers and vice versa.
So I'm going to jump in real quick before Kevin moves on. And it's funny that you brought that tweet up because we actually have, our followers, our core guys right now trying to get Devonta to come on the show by,
Nice.
So I jumped on. We won't get into the whole story, but I did draft him in 2015 in our Falafel 16 team league. And there's an unbelievably great story that goes with it, with the guy who drafted Tevin Coleman. And it became like part of the Falafel lore in our chat on the Fantasy Life app, and we would love to get him on for 10 minutes. And so we're kind of campaigning. So we're asking you tomorrow, JJ, on our behalf, since you have a little bit more followers than us combined, beg Devonta to come on.
I'll do what I can. I'll do what I can.
Yeah, considering he just said that he didn't like him back then, it's probably going to be an uphill battle, right?
I'm not saying Devonta's going to listen to this episode.
Oh man. All right. So switching gears for a second, I want to ask you, because obviously you said, the late round quarterback, you wrote you wrote that and it kind of put you on the map. So I wanted to ask you I'm going to call it an explosion of superflex, where it's two QBs just about across the board, whether you're playing superflex or two QBs, straight two QB leagues. Are you still focusing on the late round QB or have you kind of changed your thinking for those leagues? Do you bump them up a little? I mean, obviously they get so inflated when you're talking about the superflex and the two QBs, but do you bump your thinking up at all, or are you still kind of waiting in the weeds for those later round guys?
Yeah, so I mean, with the quarterback position, the reason you wait for it, if you want to dumb it down as much as possible, is because of the supply and demand of the position. You're only starting one quarterback each week in a standard fantasy football league. There are so many usable quarterbacks out there, so as a result, you can wait forever to get that position because it's replaceable. Obviously, when you start two quarterbacks, that's essentially what a superflex league does, they become more important because the demand for the position essentially doubles. You're starting two instead of just one. But I will say that there's still the predictability element of the quarterback position. What I mean by that is going into a given week of the four main positions in fantasy football, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, and running back, quarterbacks are by far the most predictable just because of the sample size that you're getting from them each week. They're going to throw the ball 30 plus times per game. And as a result, you have a larger sample size and they're just naturally easy to predict. So I will say that in a superflex league, because of the predictability angle of things, I'm totally cool with getting a platoon of meh players, more QB2 guys, and playing them by matchup in order to hit on some of those QB1 weeks that they will produce, because every quarterback is going to give you some sort of usable performance throughout a season. It's just how it works in fantasy football, because the range of how much they're scoring, they have good floors, and their ceilings, compared to other quarterbacks, it's not like they have these insane ceilings. Most guys, maybe they'll blow up a couple weeks a season, but it's not like they're consistently posting 30, 35 points per year. So basically their points, the number of points that they're scoring is very scrunched to this median and to this mean. And so as a result, you utilize the predictability aspect. You're able to pinpoint good matchups, and you can kind of platoon the position. The biggest downfall and the biggest downside to me when I'm drafting in superflex leagues, and I get super, super angry, is just like you mentioned, how everyone just hoards quarterbacks, right? And I can't be dumb enough to just wait because of this idea and the philosophies that I believe in, because I have to understand market value, and I have to understand that I can't just wait forever because I devalue the position still, even in superflex leagues, more than my other league mates are, because we know that there is a supply that will eventually run out because there's only 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL.
So before we get into some other stuff, what are some of those meh quarterbacks that you do target in these leagues, and any particular reason why you target those ones?
Yeah, so I think every year I have a list of QB2 types that I'm drafting a lot of that I could see having top 5 seasons, potentially at least top 10 seasons. So maybe an Andy Dalton type I love Andy Dalton this season. Carson Palmer is one who I've drafted a lot. Joe Flacco I'm okay with. Ryan Tannehill, hate the guy from a real football standpoint. Don't think he's even that great from a fantasy football standpoint, but he'll have his spots. You can pick and choose his spots. Those kind of players that aren't sexy, that no one really wants, they usually will fall a bit in drafts. Maybe not Dalton as much because he's picking up some steam, but they'll fall in drafts a bit. And if I can get 3 of them and feel pretty good about them week to week with matchups, and I think I'm feeling pretty good.
You may be the first person on the show ever to praise Joe Flacco for something. So
yeah. Yeah, definitely not a huge fan of Flacco, but he has his spots throughout the season.
You know what I love about Flacco is he put himself on the line and stepped up and got himself the biggest payday. And I just feel like he's on easy street now. He's like, I don't got to do anything.
He's living the dream.
And I agree with your Tannehill point. He's a quarterback I'm grabbing late in best ball leagues because like you said, I think he'll have his spots. And obviously in best ball, you don't have to really, set your lineup. And so I'll be there when those weeks come up. Mm-hmm. So I hope that Todd Burrows, our friend Todd from PA, I don't know if you know who he is. He just put out an article on RotoViz, and I hope he appreciates that I'm asking you this, because who better to ask than you? And he has a concept where quarterback scoring hasn't changed, and it's been too simple over the years, and that's really why the position ends up so clumped up every year. Most people give a -1 or a -2 for an interception, but he came up with the concept of a -3 for the interception, and then if it's returned for a touchdown, an additional -3, essentially making a pick six worth -6. How, if at all, would that change your drafting philosophy in a standard league where you're starting one quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's the key, is that if I'm still starting one quarterback, it's really not going to change things all that dramatically. I think if you run a projection system and you change the scoring to reflect the -3 for an interception and another -3 for a return touchdown, it's going to show a bigger difference in quarterbacks overall. Aaron Rodgers, from a overall value-based drafting standpoint, is going to look a lot better compared to a replacement level player, and so on. But the thing is that fantasy football isn't played on a season-long level. It's played on a weekly level. I actually did a study a couple of years ago looking at the change in 4 points per touchdown pass to 6 points per touchdown pass, because it's one of the most common questions that I get. And I figured I would just rather send a link and get some clicks, and that would be a lot easier than explaining it every single time that someone asked the question. So I did a quick study on it, and I was I was even blown away by the numbers that showed. I looked at what happened to top 12 performances, so weekly performances, and how many of these performances specific quarterbacks had with 4 points per touchdown pass and with 6 points per touchdown pass. And what I found was, instead of the number of quarterbacks having those usable weeks decreasing, because you would assume that if there's more elite quarterbacks getting 6 points per touchdown pass, those elite quarterbacks would separate themselves a little bit more, which would then decrease the number of usable weeks in total from quarterbacks. What I actually found was it increased it. And guys that you wouldn't assume would benefited. Like Cam Newton, for instance, 2 seasons ago was better from a weekly standpoint, was more usable when he had 6 points per touchdown pass rather than 4 points per touchdown pass, when everyone assumes that a rushing quarterback would benefit in a 4 points per touchdown pass league. So those are and it all comes down to the fact that, sure, Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, they're going to look better from a season-long perspective when you change up the amount of points that they're going to score based on the scoring system. But realistically, the way fantasy football is played is on a weekly level, and those smaller scoring changes aren't going to be seen very easily through the weekly game, even though they will from a season-long perspective.
That is very, very interesting. That's a good way to think about that. I got to change positions here and move on to the running backs. Probably my favorite article that I've read all offseason, and it is a grueling offseason. We're nearing the end of it. Is your article that you put out in late May about handcuffing running backs. This is a philosophy that a lot of people use very often, and you took the anti-approach to that and basically kiboshed the handcuffing of the running back. So can you give our listeners an idea as how that came about and just why handcuffing running backs is actually not a very good idea?
Yeah, I like to just piss people off on Twitter, so I just take whatever's accepted and try to prove it wrong. Now, with handcuffing, I noticed that there's often a lot of confirmation bias involved with it. So, the people who owned Michael Bush in 2010 when Darren McFadden got hurt and Michael Bush became a thing, those people now say, hey, you should draft handcuffs because Michael Bush worked out. Or the people who owned D'Angelo Williams when Le'Veon Bell tore his knee up a couple seasons ago when D'Angelo Williams became an RB1, they say that's why you need to have a handcuff. But realistically, if you look at how handcuffs actually performed, it's not great, Bob. Really, if you look at all RB1 handcuffs over the last 6 years, and there are plenty of ways to define what a handcuff is. I think I defined it in the article as running backs that were on the same team as top 12 running backs, but were drafted after the 6th round, because that's generally when you're no longer drafting starters. Most of the guys who actually produced, who were drafted late, didn't produce because of an injury. And I'm talking about Tevin Coleman last season, wasn't because of a Devontae Freeman injury. Giovanni Bernard when Jeremy Hill was drafted high. Fred Jackson when CJ Spiller was there in Buffalo. Ryan Matthews with DeMarco Murray in Philadelphia. All of those instances, they weren't handcuffs in the traditional sense in terms of them stepping in for injured guys and then producing. But I would say that the most interesting thing that I found is that of the 72 RB1 running back sample that I looked at, so again, that's the last 6 years, top 12 running backs, pre-draft, obviously, we had 105 what I called injury weeks, or stretches of time where one of those RB1s was hurt. So we're giving the audience the fact that, okay, your RB1 is injured. So basically, if an RB1 missed 3 or more weeks, I grouped that together to have 105 total injury weeks. Among those 105 weeks, the handcuffs that we drafted for those RB1s produced a top 24 performance, just an RB2 performance, 34% of the time. That's basically what Jalen Richard did last year. So basically what I'm saying is if we assume that the RB1 is hurt, so we're assuming that he's hurt, even when that's the case, even when that's the assumption, the handcuff that's stepping in is Jalen Richard. So not only are you holding on to this handcuff forever because the average RB1 injury has occurred between weeks 7 and 8, so you're holding on to this handcuff forever. And not only that, but we don't even know who that handcuff's going to be. There's many instances like Noshan Moreno when he broke out. He was not the handcuff to Monte Ball. Ronnie Hillman was the handcuff to Monte Ball. We don't know who the handcuffs are going to be, which is a big reason why the hit rates are so low. But even still, handcuffs are handcuffs for a reason. They're backups on their team for a reason. It's because they're not very good at football. They're not good running. And so overall, I was just trying to put some context into what handcuffs actually do, because like I said, I think that we hold on to the successes without looking at what the bust rate really is.
How many people you think ran to their waiver wire, picked up Chris Johnson today?
Yeah, right. I mean, there's just, and you know what the funny thing is with the D'Angelo Williams thing, the only two successful, the truly successful handcuffs over the last 6 years were Michael Bush and D'Angelo Williams. But the thing is, D'Angelo Williams was drafted because Le'Veon Bell was suspended. When Le'Veon Bell came back, D'Angelo Williams, because we had a Brandon Gadula who writes for Number Fire. He's a phenomenal writer. He did an amazing series on waiver wire running backs and how easy they are to get off the waiver wire, which is not easy at all. But he did an article on it, and he noted that season, D'Angelo Williams was on the waiver wire in the majority of fantasy leagues. So even the teams that drafted D'Angelo Williams dropped him after Le'Veon Bell finally came back.
Hey, and the guys are going to say, Sal, you talk too much, but too bad. I'm on the show and I'm going to talk. Great story, JJ. So we're in a 16-team league in 2015, and I had the number one waiver wire priority, and I saved it, and I saved it, and I saved it. And Arlene Starkwear had a good game, and I'm like, I need to run it back. I grabbed Arlene Starkwear, and he was Arlene Starkwear. And 1 week later, Le'Veon Bell got injured, and D'Angelo Williams took over, and he was a free agent. And Steve, who's on the show with us right now, picked him up and won the championship.
Correct. That is correct. He was dropped for a kicker.
Wow. Yeah. You know what? I'll also say as a caveat, this is more about drafting handcuffs, not owning them once the season progresses. So, if it's week 9 and your bye weeks are over and you don't need those random dart throws that haven't panned out, you can drop them and get your handcuff. It's more so using the equity in your draft to get these guys who usually don't pan out, let alone we don't even know, we have a better understanding of who those handcuffs are even, as the season progresses.
In other words, maybe take a shot in the draft on some guy who might actually have some talent as opposed to just randomly handcuffing. Right, so just out of curiosity then, out of those 105 that you studied the injury weeks, was there any other trends or anything that you did notice in looking at that people should keep in mind as far as maybe guys that they should have drafted instead, or maybe guys that they should look at that aren't traditional handcuffs that kind of emerged? Or was it really just a study in not drafting handcuffs?
No, I mean, like I said, I think that the injury stuff was pretty like the timing of the injuries was one point that I tried to push home a lot because, again, we're drafting these handcuffs in August and you're going to be holding on to these guys longer than you think. I think the assumption for whatever reason is that your running back is going to get hurt in weeks 1 or 2, but that rarely happens. Usually those injuries happen later in the season, which makes sense because these guys are getting worn down and that's when injuries occur. So I think that's one of the key takeaways that I didn't really emphasize a ton within the article, but note that there's a cost in holding on to an asset on your bench. It's just like inventory, right? For a company. I mean, there's a cost in just holding on to a product in a warehouse. And it's the same deal when it comes to a handcuff or a guy that's doing absolutely nothing on your fantasy bench.
Absolutely. So you wrote an article a while back as well, trying to find the next Todd Gurley. And, a lot's been made about Todd Gurley this offseason as far as whether or not he's going to bounce back and how bad his season was last year. Was it actually bad, even though he had decent numbers? Was it just the offense? All of this and that. And so you wrote an article which used a stat or a metric known as net expected points to try and pinpoint who the next Todd Gurley is. Someone that had a really big season this year or this past year in 2016, but could struggle in 17. Melvin Gordon, Jay Ajayi, and Jordan Howard were the 3 you identified in the article. Obviously, you focused on Melvin Gordon, but I wanted to get your opinion because obviously those are 3 pretty big names that a lot of people are drafting pretty highly this year. So can you give us a little bit of background on net expected points and then maybe talk about why you think it's possible that Melvin Gordon could be the Todd Gurley of this year?
Yeah, so net expected points essentially looks at every down and distance and every yard line and every situation, and it assigns, there's an expected point value at that yard line in that situation. So if it's 1st and 10 on the 50-yard line, there's an expected point value on that drive. And then whatever happens on the next play, whether it's an increase in expected points or a decrease in expected points. So let's say that the expected point value on a drive that starts in the 50, it's 1st and 10 is like 3.5 points because most of the time that you kick a field goal, sometimes you'll score a touchdown. If, let's say, Jordan Howard runs 20 yards down the field and he makes it to the 30-yard line, well, now it's 1st and 10 from the 30-yard line, and now your expected point value this is completely arbitrary, but 4.5 points. Well, that 1 point of expected points gets attributed then to Jordan Howard because he's the one who made that play. So you can analyze expected points in a lot of different ways. Naturally, passing is going to be more efficient than rushing is just because you can gain bigger chunks of yards at once. But when you look at running backs within the position, you can start to get an idea of how they actually performed rather than looking at somewhat arbitrary parameters like we have with fantasy football. So, with running backs also, I don't love looking at per rush efficiency in and of itself, similarly to how I don't like looking at yards per carry averages because they don't tell you the full story. And that's really where, as much as I missed on Devontae Freeman a couple years ago, I freaking nailed Todd Gurley last year. And the reason for that is because Todd Gurley had a really, really high rushing NEP per rush average, but his success rate, which looks at things more from a binary perspective. So it looks at, was this a positive expected points play or was it a negative expected points play? Todd Gurley's success rate was really, really low. And what that tells you is that if his efficiency is really high and his success rate's really low, then he's basically making a living off of big plays. And we know that that's not sustainable year in and year out, or even week in and week out. And that's a big, big reason, aside from the fact that they didn't really have a quarterback, that I stayed away from Todd Gurley last year. So I went through the same exercise with the questionable running backs, or at least what I think are questionable because we don't have a huge sample size on them, with Melvin Gordon, J.J., and Jordan Howard.
So let me stop you for a second before you get into that, because I'm curious what your thoughts are on Todd Gurley this year then.
Yeah, so he basically did the same thing last year. From a success rate standpoint, it was basically identical, maybe a little bit worse. I think he had like a 34% success rate this past year, and it was 36% the year before. Usually an average running back will have about a 40% success rate, just for some context. So Todd Gurley, though, he didn't have the efficiency because he didn't break those big runs. He didn't have those monster plays. So he regressed from that perspective, continuing with a really bad success rate. And that's really why he had such a bad season, because he was just doing bad things all of the time.
It's not usually not a good trend for a running back.
No.
All right. So tell us about the three guys you identified for this year that are potential candidates.
Yeah. So, we have small samples on Jordan Howard, J.J., Melvin Gordon. I think a lot of people are down on Jordan Howard. They think that he would be the de facto Todd Gurley because of the offense that he's in. He doesn't have a quarterback, and that's you obviously want to associate your running back play with good quarterback play because you want more opportunities in the red zone. You want scoring opportunities because touchdowns drive fantasy football. But really looking at it, Jordan Howard was a monster last year. He was not like Todd Gurley at all from an analytical perspective. Jordan Howard was right in line from his efficiency perspective. He was right in line with where he should have been from a success rate standpoint. So I don't think Jordan Howard is going to bust the same way that Todd Gurley busted. Jay Ajayi, very, very similar. He had decent efficiency, and I know that a lot of people will look at his few big games that he had, and they'll assume that because he had those few big games, he's bound to regress. Yeah, he might regress a little bit. He definitely did not have as good of a success rate as Jordan Howard did versus his efficiency, but even still, it wasn't that far off from the trend line of where he should have been. Melvin Gordon was actually the dude who was way more efficient than what he should have been based on his success rate. Now, the thing is that Melvin Gordon, I don't want to deem him or dub him as the Todd Gurley of 2017 because obviously Melvin Gordon's situation is a lot more favorable than what Todd Gurley had. And we know that regardless of how good the player is, regardless of what the analytics say, opportunity and situation matters so much in fantasy football. And if he's with Phillip Rivers in a good passing attack, we know that he's going to get goal line touches. We know that he's going to catch the ball to the backfield, which is something that Todd Gurley hasn't proven to really do either. That's why I'm still okay with Melvin Gordon as a late first, early second round pick. But of the three guys who profiles most to be like Todd Gurley, it would be Melvin Gordon.
So you're not grabbing Brandon Oliver anywhere, or you are?
No Brandon Oliver. No Brandon Oliver.
I'll just say that the two of you guys, if JJ and Kevin don't get invited to the Scott Fish Bowl next year because even putting JJ on that list and then Kevin bringing it up, you guys are going to have to answer to Scott for that because we all know that Scott loves him like a brother, for God's sakes. But JJ, you touched on Le'Veon Bell and his situation, and you spoke out about that on Twitter today. So do you think that he's severely overvaluing himself? Do you think there's a possibility that Pittsburgh lets a player of his magnitude walk away after this year because of the history of injuries and the suspensions? And touch on him and touch on Zeke, two guys that are, going number 2 and number 3, sometimes number 1. Should guys be nervous about the future of these two players?
I think with Le'Veon Bell, there's definitely a chance that he's not a Steeler after this year, or at least in the next 2 years, because they'll probably just franchise him again. But I think with Bell, I'm not doubting the talent of Le'Veon Bell. I mean, I'm a Steeler fan. I love Le'Veon Bell as a player and what he can do on the field. He's so fun to watch, and he could easily be one of the best, if not the best running back of this era. I mean, that's how good he is. But at the same time, I think that when you look at what Le'Veon Bell is talking about and what he thinks his leverage is from a contract standpoint, it really doesn't make that much sense. The running back position is inherently devalued from a real football perspective. And actually, our expected points model really shows that because it compares all plays the same way. And you can see how a quarterback's passes per dropback, for instance, the average quarterback expected points added per dropback last year was about 0.12 points. So what that means is when you saw a random quarterback drop back to pass, he was effectively adding 0.12 points for his team's total. Whereas at the running back position, you're actually technically losing points on average with each rush. And it's not because you should never run the football. I would say that teams should throw the ball more, but not all teams have good quarterbacks to be able to do that. It's not that you should just never run the football. It's just that running the football is inherently inefficient. It's not a very good way to win football games. And as a result of that, it just doesn't make that much sense to allocate a ton of money to a guy like Le'Veon Bell when the running back position is fairly replaceable. Now, I'm not saying that Le'Veon Bell is bad. Le'Veon Bell is probably the best running back in the NFL, or the second best running back in the NFL. I get what he's trying to say, but at the same time, we saw what the Steelers looked like with DeAngelo Williams under center, and there have been people in my mentions saying, well, DeAngelo Williams is really, really good, and he's a good backup. It's like, if he's so good, why was he wrestling earlier this month? If he's so good, why isn't he on a team right now? It's that the running back position is just naturally replaceable. So I just don't understand. It's the same deal. We can say Le'Veon Bell is the most elite player at his position and therefore he should be paid. But okay, should Justin Tucker get $15 million a year? Of course not, because kickers don't matter that much because they're more replaceable. And I'm not trying to say that running backs are as important as kickers or vice versa. I'm mostly saying that you have to look at the positional value first, and that's the reason why running backs aren't getting paid like Le'Veon Bell wants them to get paid. I guess I can answer the Zeke thing too.
Yeah. I got you.
But with Zeke, I mean, I'm hearing rumblings and whatnot that it could be a 6+ game suspension, which is a really, really big deal. And so from a fantasy perspective, it's a scenario where I think that we're at a point where if you're drafting right now, you have to probably take him after the big 3 wide receivers and maybe even a little bit later than that. I can't imagine a scenario at this point where he's not suspended at least a little bit. And if some of the rumors are true, it could be a lot longer than what we initially would think.
Yeah, that would be a huge deal. So we are going to take a little bit of a break. I need some water after all of this information that we've just gotten here. And we are going to take a small break and talk about the draft app.
All right, as Steve alluded to while he takes his sip of water, we are going to talk about the draft app. There's a lot of things that we love about this app. As you can see from our show, or listen to on our show last week, we did a live draft. It's probably not live anymore, so I don't know if I can still call it that, but we did do a best ball draft on air last week. It was a great episode. It was a lot of fun. I think we were able to tell you some thoughts on our players while doing a 30-second clock draft, which was pretty interesting, Sal.
Yeah, I mean, I got some good value in that draft that is probably no longer going to be there with some of the injuries or bonehead moves by certain players this week with Deonta Foreman, basically running around like he's Scarface. The Lamar Miller value that was there is no longer going to be there. And also with Mike Williams getting injured, that Tyrell Williams value that I was getting in those best ball drafts is no longer there, but we're still having a good time with drafting. Like I said, you could run into some big fantasy names. I've been drafted with Pat Thorman. I drafted with some of the Roto Grinder guys. The DHH podcast guys are on there. Steve and Kevin from the Falafel House podcast are on there.
Not Steve.
No,
Seriously?
I'm there. You better believe it, pal.
Wow.
In fact, every time I draft, and I don't include Steve, he gets mad at me. Like, I want to stop taking your money.
That's true.
I'd like to stop taking your money, Steve, or maybe give both of us a chance to win some money.
There we go. I'm only in 15 drafts so far. So
that's not bad. Yeah. What is your let's go by numbers though. What is your your highest win total? Like, what can you win? What's the most you can win?
The most I can win, I believe it eclipsed $400 the last draft that I entered. So
Whoa.
I'm in 15 drafts right now, and the most I can win is $432, and I expect on winning all of that. Actually,
That's your total for all the leagues combined.
all 15. Yep.
Gotcha.
But I'm gonna win all of them, so I mean, it's not. It's
Well, if that
it
happens,
says potential,
I expect that you're
but
going
it
to have
is
a
expected
new job.
also.
You'll have a new job next year if that happens. I'm convinced of that.
All
So
right.
just to be clear, those are all best balls. They're season longs, no management. You can pretty much just go in. You draft these pretty quickly. You can see that we did one in about 40 minutes, I think it was. We've done some smaller leagues in about 20 minutes. I think we did it was 16 league once in 20 minutes. You can do 3-team leagues in like 10 minutes and be done. It's just really great, really functional. The app itself is easy to use. It's intuitive. It makes a lot of sense. It's the only place that you can get season-long and daily snake drafts. And obviously, Sal, you probably want to mention Falafel when you sign up, right?
Yeah, if you download the app and you put in the Falafel code, which is Falafel, FLAFFL, you are going to get, when you deposit $10 or more, a free entry into an additional best ball draft, and it's available on both iOS and Android. So, did I say iOS?
Yeah, you did say iOS, yeah.
How old are you again?
I'm getting up there. iOS.
Let's go to playdraft.com/falafel as well. You can do it online and make sure you get that same code and $10 free for free entry with that deposit. So Steve, real quick before we get back to JJ, who's your favorite player on the app right now, on the draft app right now? Who's the guy you're taking the most?
My favorite player, oddly enough, I've been in the 15 best ball leagues on the app. I've been on quite a few other drafts as well. I've gotten so many early picks that Le'Veon Bell has been my favorite pick that I've gotten so far, and I've got him just about everywhere. So him taking a chance on not signing this contract, like Sal said about Joe Flacco, I am hoping that Le'Veon Bell makes this a contract season for him, and he just goes out and just puts up numbers that earns him a very significant contract next year. So Le'Veon Bell, I mean, I know it's an easy answer because he's a top 3 pick no matter what format you're playing in, but I have not had a lot of seasons where I've had him on my team. So I'm very excited to have him in as many places as I do this year.
Definitely one of the best things about the draft app in these best ball leagues is you can get players that you may not have in your dynasty leagues already and that you may not be able to draft in your redraft league. So definitely a lot of fun to get in a bunch of those. Sal, who's the guy you've drafted the most, you think?
Sadly enough, I think on 4 of my teams I have Ezekiel Elliott.
Oh no!
So, but a guy I mentioned that I like in best ball, and I think he's going to stay healthy this year, is a guy I have down talked in the past, but I've been grabbing him at good value, is Sammy Watkins. I think this will be a full 16-game season for him, and I have been grabbing him on a lot of my teams.
Yeah, for me, it's obviously you guys know LaShawn McCoy is a guy that I've gotten a lot. John Brown is a guy that I've taken a lot, and of course, late, I'm taking Taylor Gabriel quite a bit because I think he's probably a good sneaky value in a best ball format. But all right, so check out the draft app. Again, that's playdraft.com/falafel. Or if you're on the app, make sure you use the falafel code FLAFFL. And let's get back to JJ.
All right. Now that we've talked about that, we're going to get into yet another article that JJ has written for Number Fire. It seems that he just does this. This is what he does. He pumps out articles all day long, all week, all off season.
So you're saying the guy's
time.
good at his job, Steve, unlike other people that might be on his podcast currently?
I was not going to go there, but Sal, thank you.
He's talking about you, Steve.
I don't know. I write articles for our website. I don't know about you. I don't know.
Somebody's got to edit. JJ, you know what I'm talking about. Somebody's got to edit.
You just put out an article about 13 underrated fantasy football players, and one that stuck out to me was Ty Montgomery, and most notably that stands out to me because I am a huge Jamal Williams truther. As soon as they drafted him for on the Packers, I thought that he was going to be the running back one there. At some point during the season, he was going to take over that job, but you think that Ty Montgomery is being undervalued so far. So what is the argument for Ty Montgomery? Why is he such a steal going in the 4th round?
By the way, I'm also an Aaron Jones truther, so we can fight throughout the season. As that,
Nice.
But with Ty Montgomery, last season when he saw at least 40% of Green Bay's snaps, that was 9 of his 15 games played. In those contests, he averaged about 8 carries, about 50 rushing yards, a third of a touchdown. He had almost 6 targets, 4.5 receptions, and 36 receiving yards per contest. Basically, in PPR formats, when he had 40% or more of the team snaps, he was averaging 15 fantasy points per outing, which is a top 10 number at the position. You mentioned Jamal Williams. I mentioned my boy Aaron Jones. If you look at the draft equity spent on those running backs, I think if Green Bay had a sincere issue with Ty Montgomery, they would have spent a higher draft pick on a running back. And the reason I say that is because they didn't enter the draft with a depth chart. Their depth chart was literally a running back who played wide receiver to start the 2016 season. And so as a result of that, I think that their confidence in Ty Mont is there. So obviously we know that volume is going to drive everything in fantasy football. And if Ty Montgomery is seeing 12 to 15 touches a game in that offense, especially the role that he's playing because he's such a good pass catcher, naturally, because he's coming from the wide receiver position, I think in PPR formats, he's very, very undervalued. I could see him being a fringe RB1, low-end RB1 this season.
So I looked today, moving through that same article, I looked today, and first I was staggered by the fact that when I looked at MFL, I had 30 leagues all of a sudden. I have no idea how that happened. But I looked today, and John Brown was on 11 of those rosters. Obviously, he's a guy that I've been buying all over the place. He's a guy that you wrote about in that article. You mentioned his health being, coming back around. Obviously, that's going to be a big factor, but what is it about John Brown that you love? Is it just the value, or do you actually like him as a solid play this year as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the value's there, I think, given the news in the article, but also just that he's a later round pick right now, which for a guy who could be in line for 18% of the Arizona Cardinals targets, especially with Michael Floyd gone, there's not a ton of competition there. I think it's a really good value just from a volume standpoint. But, you mentioned that he was hurt last year. He had that sickle cell trait. And you can see just by looking at his air yards profile and his yards after catch profile, that probably played a role. So in 2015, so 2 years ago when Carson Palmer balled out, John Brown had 10.49 air yards per catch. So every catch that he had, the ball was traveling 10.49 yards through the air before he caught it. And then his yards after the catch was 4.94. Okay. In 2016, his air yards per catch was 10.46, which is only 0.03 lower than what it was in 2015. So he's basically catching the ball in the same area of the field. It's a decent air yards profile. It's pretty deep. But his yards after the catch per catch dropped from 4.94 to 2.79. So basically what that says is John Brown was not able to do much with the football after he actually caught the football. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was injured. Carson Palmer himself has a lot of progression coming in his favor. He had a below average touchdown rate last year, so hopefully that bounces back a little bit this year. There was already a report today that Bruce Arians was talking about how Carson Palmer's arm is a lot stronger than what it was to start last year, which is really good news. I think just given that, and given the fact that John Brown is going to be the de facto number 2 target in that offense behind an aging Larry Fitzgerald, who maybe this is the year that Larry Fitzgerald finally falls off the map, John Brown could really be in store for a big season.
That's incredible. You think about that yards after the catch. I mean, that's a quarter of a point on every reception.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like that. I didn't look at the difference, like what the biggest differences were over the last half decade or whatever. But I would assume that would be, especially given the fact that his air yards profile was so similar. Because a lot of guys who catch the ball deep down the field, they don't have a very high yards after the catch per catch rate, because obviously they don't have that much room to run after they catch the ball that deep. Whereas a Golden Tate or a Jarvis Landry is getting all kinds of yak because they're catching the ball at the line of scrimmage. The fact that he had such a similar air yards per catch rate in 2015 and 2016, and there was such a discrepancy between yak per catch, that to me that screams that health had to have played a role in some way.
Yeah, it's a shame for me that I play in a lot of leagues with Kevin, because I'm a John Brown fan too, but he seems to be either outbidding me or grabbing him around the head of wherever we play. And I think on a whole, the Cardinals are going to come into this season so underrated. I mean, this was a team 2 years ago that really could have won a Super Bowl, had a little bit of tough luck down the stretch. So I expect an uptick for all the Cardinals. And so since Kevin's been grabbing John Brown, I haven't been able to get him. That's going to lead me to talk to you about another guy on that list, and that's Pierre Garcon. I have Garcon And we do our rankings based on 12-team leagues, JJ. And I have him at my number 22 wide receiver currently. I think he's got an excellent shot to be a wide receiver too. And if you read your article, he's being drafted as a wide receiver 4 right now. So go into why you believe he could. Where do you think he could finish, and why he's such a great value?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question mark surrounding Pierre Garcon is the touchdown upside, because that offense could be really bad. There's not a whole lot of talent there. And I know that a lot of people, I think Brian Hoyer is an underrated quarterback, both even sort of from a fantasy perspective, but definitely from a real football perspective. But let's not forget that the last time that Kyle Shanahan coached Brian Hoyer, which was in Cleveland in 2014, the Browns threw a grand total of 12 touchdown passes. Like, I'm pretty sure Aaron Rodgers can do that in week 1 and 2.
But what about when he had Pierre Garcon on his team last time?
Right, exactly.
Offensive coordinator.
Exactly. So you can buy into the Kyle Shanahan narrative of him feeding his number 1 wide receivers. To me, there's a little bit of bias with the Kyle Shanahan narrative, and the only reason I say that is because you can find reasons why those wide receivers were fed when they were fed. For instance, when Kyle Shanahan was a coordinator for Andre Johnson in Houston, Andre Johnson got a ton of targets, and people will always pinpoint Andre Johnson got a ton of targets under Kyle Shanahan. Well, when Kyle Shanahan left, Andre Johnson still got a lot of targets. Or if you look at the season with Pierre Garcon saw 181 targets with Kyle Shanahan, I think back in 2013 it was. The number 2 pass catcher on that team was like a 32-year-old, 33-year-old Santana Moss. There really was no one else that offense could really go to outside of Pierre Garcon. And then you look at Julio Jones 2 years ago when Kyle Shanahan went to Atlanta. Julio Jones hits the 200 target mark. Everyone goes nuts. But if you look at that team, they had no secondary pass catcher whatsoever. Their number 2 wide receiver is Roddy White, who looked like a corpse on the field. So
it's freaking Julio Jones.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing too. We're also talking about Julio Jones and Andre Johnson in the cases for Kyle Shanahan's number 1 wide receiver. Like, Julio Jones is going to be fed because Julio Jones is really, really good at football, But with that being said, Pierre Garcon's situation this season is literally Pierre Garcon. That he's the only pass catcher that I think anyone should be really worried about in that San Francisco offense. So I think that he can see a nice market share. He had almost a 30% market share when he was with Washington with Kyle Shanahan, when he had that 181 targets. That's an insanely high number. I think that, he could maybe hover in the 22.5, 24% target market share, which is still, a top 10 to top 15 number in the NFL. But with that being said, I don't worry about the volume. I don't worry about his floor each week, especially in PPR. I worry a lot more about that touchdown upside because Pierre Garcon has proven to not be the most elite touchdown scorer in the league.
I think Jeremy Curley takes great issue with everything that you just said.
Oh, boy. He's still in the league?
Please don't let Jeremy Curley listen to this podcast.
All right, I got to talk about a guy last year going into the 2016 season. I was all over Sterling Shepard. I was able to pick up through all of the intense information going out on the last late round pod with Rich Rebar, and I believe I heard him say that the New York Giants use a 3 wide receiver set on 97% of their pass plays. So yeah. I want to know, does that mean that Sterling Shepard is dead this season with the addition of Brandon Marshall, the draft pick of Evan Ingram? He's being drafted as wide receiver 57 right now in the 13th round. Or do you think he still holds some value for this 2017 season and he's going to end up being a sneaky pick in those late rounds?
I still think that an injury has to happen for him to be like super, super usable in fantasy football. Last season, he was kind of buoyed by some fortune from a touchdown standpoint. Yeah. He ended up, I mentioned net expected points. I work with net expected points from a wide receiver standpoint, and I regress it to see how many touchdowns players should score versus how many they actually scored, because expected points is telling you how many points that they're contributing on a football field, and it's agnostic to the red zone and the arbitrary 20-yard line that we often reference as the red zone. So we're actually looking at how many real points this guy's adding. According to his expected points profile last year, Sterling Shepard should have scored between 5 and 6 touchdowns, but he scored 8 touchdowns. So that really buoyed him from a fantasy perspective last season and being a more reliant or reliable wide receiver that you could throw in your lineup. Now you throw in, OBJ's obviously there. They draft Evan Ingram, who's an athletic pass-catching tight end. And then they add Brandon Marshall, who's been a good red zone threat. To me, that allure for Sterling Shepard kind of goes away. He was already going to regress a bit from a touchdown standpoint, and just given the mouths to feed argument is a lame one to make, but it's a very real one. If you're building projections, you have to sort out the market shares of the wide receivers and the tight ends in a particular offense. And in the Giants case, they have guys that are going to demand a market share. Odell Beckham is going to see 25% of the team's targets. That's thrown away automatically. Brandon Marshall is going to demand, in the high teens. So targets might not be there for Sterling Shepard. And I usually, for a slot guy, I like to have a lot of volume for him because usually those slot guys aren't scoring a ton of touchdowns.
All right, so I'm looking through our rankings right now, and I clearly have noticed that Steve has done some adjustments. So I have to give him credit here, but I was going to ask you because Steve at one point, not too long ago, had Eric Ebron as probably the lowest of low-end tight end twos you could possibly have.
Killing me.
He's since moved him up in PPR. He's now at 15, which is still, so he's now a high-end tight end two. But I know that you're a little higher on Ebron, so I was hoping you might be able to convince him why he was right to move him up and why he may want to consider continuing to move him up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the year for Eric Ebron. Like I was kind of into Ebron the last couple seasons, or at least last season, but I think that things are really coming together for Eric Ebron to be that late round tight end pick that's athletic, that become, as we've seen with the Tyler Eifert and Travis Kelce in years past. I think that Ebron could be that guy this year. There's a great tweet from Pat Thorman, at Pat_Thorman, who writes for PFF. It was since 1980, only 5 tight ends had more catches than Eric Ebron through their age 23 season. And they're all, it's Jason Witten, Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, Tony Gonzalez, and Todd Heap. It's just unbelievable talent. And only 7 had more yards than Eric Ebron had. I think the thing with Eric Ebron is, and I don't think I know the thing with Eric Ebron, is that he doesn't score touchdowns. He didn't score touchdowns in college at Carolina, and he certainly has not scored touchdowns at the NFL level. He had 1 last year. He's had 7 in 3 seasons at the NFL level. There are touchdown issues, but if you think about where Eric Ebron plays on the field and where Anquan Boldin played on the field, he played the slot. Anquan Boldin was 7th in the league last year in slot percentage among 50-plus target wide receivers. Anquan Boldin's now gone. Eric Ebron's going to have that slot in the red zone more to himself. And that's a big deal because Anquan Boldin finished tied for 2nd last season of all NFL wide receivers in red zone targets. And he was 3rd in targets from within the opponent's 10-yard line. Now Anquan Boldin's gone. Golden Tate, sure, he'll take some of that slot role, but Golden Tate certainly is not the same type of red zone threat that a guy like Anquan Boldin is. They're already talking about Eric Ebron not blocking as much this season. I think they have a plan for Ebron to finally be that red zone threat given his body size. And look, even if he's not a red zone threat, even if he doesn't score the touchdowns, he's still been a high-end tight end 2, a low-end tight end 1 last season from a week-to-week standpoint. So at the very least, you're getting some usability out of him. But the upside is really, really crazy if you consider the fact that Boldin's gone and they might use him a little bit more in the red zone.
Steve, what say you?
I got to say, it makes a lot of sense, but it almost sounds like he's a believer in Jim Bob Cooter and the departure of Anquan Boldin as opposed to Eric Ebron staying healthy on the field for an entire season.
Sure.
And
sure.
The whole first part of his spiel was how good Ebron can be. You're just picking the things that you like. That's what you're doing there.
That's what I got to do.
Nobody picks out the stuff that they don't like, Kevin. Hey, JJ, before we get you out of here, I'm glad you brought up Pat Thurman. He's my new friend on the draft app. Been playing a lot of best balls with him, and I reached out to him yesterday. And I think we're going to have him in August. And it's nice to have guys like yourself and Pat on. Very, very smart guys. Obviously the first chance I've gotten to speak to you, and I just want to tell you, very thoroughly impressive with your knowledge and how you get it all out there. And we appreciate you joining us.
No, I appreciate you guys. It's a great time. Thank you.
All right, JJ, before you get out of here, just give everyone one quick reminder of where they can find you, where they can read this stuff, and what kind of stuff you're doing, on Twitter and anywhere else that people can get a hold of you.
Yeah, you can read my awful tweets at Late Round QB on Twitter. You can check out my content over on numberfire.com. And then, like I said, I have a couple podcasts. You can find them on really anywhere podcasts can be found. The Late Round podcast is my solo podcast. And then I do more of a fun one where we talk like half fantasy football, half not fantasy football, called Living the Stream as well.
Would you like to remind the listeners who won the Stanley Cup this year?
I would. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone heard, but the Pittsburgh Penguins are back-to-back Stanley Cup champions.
Hockey.
You know, the worst part is they could win it again next year.
They're going to win it again.
Yeah, that's the worst part about it. So, all right, JJ, we want to thank you again. He's at Late Round QB on Twitter, so go ahead and check him out, and make sure you get over to numberfire.com and read some of the stuff that not only he writes, but he edits for everyone else. Because Steve, that happens when you have to edit. You don't get to write as much. I'm just saying.
No, but he writes all the time is the thing. Is that he also edits and also writes all the time. So you're arguing.
All right, JJ, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys.
See you, JJ.
See ya.
All right, just want to thank JJ Zachariason one more time for coming on. Just again, it's amazing to me how stupid he makes Steve sound.
I am exhausted.
Yeah, it really is. It really is amazing. Sal, what do we got for a clock? What are we down to here?
We're about 3 minutes.
All right. So we breezed through the show. Somehow we paused in the middle of that to extend it for 45 minutes, and I feel like the computer hasn't exploded, which is a win. So should we just go straight to some finishing thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Go on to Twitter. Search for @FalafelHouse and then hit the follow button.
Should I be doing that?
Yeah, no, I hope that by now you've already done that. You've heard this about 115 times now, so I know that for a fact. So yes, follow us on Twitter @FalafelHouse. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Also go and check out falafelhouse.com. We've got rankings on there. We are doing divisional previews. We are previewing offensive lines from Darth Paikai. He's putting those articles out. We've got the Falafel Feuds. Nah, it's Paikai. Even though he's been an asshole lately, it is still Paikai.
Wow.
We've got the Falafel Feud going on, where people are taking sides against certain polarizing players. And yes, next week, like we alluded to earlier, normally we do not give out the names of our guests before they come on. But next week, we've got Sigmund Bloom coming on and Scott Barrett. We are having 2 episodes, 2 huge names in the fantasy industry. You guys are not going to want to miss those, so be sure to tune in. And that's all I got. Sal.
Yes, and you heard us talk earlier about the Play Draft app. One of the things I will tell you is you should follow them on Twitter @PlayDraft. And also they have an @PlayDraft support Twitter page. And they listen to what you say, guys, and they make changes. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy playing it. So get on the Play Draft app. Follow Sal33 @SidSkeet and @Wally Central. And that's it for me, Kev.
All right, yeah, definitely get on that app. And Steve, just out of curiosity, all those articles that you mentioned on falafelhouse.com, who edits those?
There's only one person right now that posts those articles and is editing them for the most part right now, and that is Kevin Cotillo. And that means that none of those articles would see the light of day if it weren't for him, and it is very appreciative of everybody else who turns in those articles that they actually get up on the website. So, Kevin, don't think that your hard work goes unnoticed.
Steve, do you think it's that Kevin stretches before he tries to reach over and pat himself on the back, or he just goes right for it?
No, I just go right for it. And the only reason I say that is because you keep giving me crap about not producing any content myself. Well, I am at least doing something. So definitely go out and check out the website, but definitely go out and check out dynastyhappyhour.com. Obviously, we're a member of their podcast group. So you can get on their website and go to the podcast page. You'll find us. You'll find some other great podcasts like the Dynasty Happy Hour and many, many others that are on there. So check that out. And quick shout out to our friend John Bosch and Matt Price, who are just started the Dynasty Game Night podcast. Search for them and find them, because that was very good podcast. The initial episode just launched. It's going to be a lot of fun. And this is great because I think we just lost Sal, which is awesome.
Yeah, he is gone. So if you want to say anything that you hope that he
now is the
hear.
time, huh? Now is the time. No, I feel like I'll be nice. I do want to also remind people, as I always do, that fantasycares.net is where you want to go if you want to get into some fantasy leagues which donate to charity. Obviously, they're run by Scott Fish. There's the the fantasy eliminators that were run by John Bosch up on there, but you can join a league. You can enter to win a chance in next year's SFB Scott Fish Bowl, and or you could just play in some great best ball leagues and try to donate some money to charity. It all goes to Toys for Tots, so it's a lot of fun. Get in there and get donating. And I think, Steve, do you have anything to say without Sal here? I
don't know. It almost looks like he came back and he's just not saying anything, and now it looks like he might be gone again. So I'm just gonna not say anything.
He's tricking us.
Yeah, he's trying to. He's
trying to trick us.
This is entrapment.
Yeah, that's it. It's entrapment. So until next time, I guess just go ahead and hit the button.
All right.